What if the reason more women aren't soaring isn't a lack of talent, but a lack of access? Today, we are talking about what it takes to stop waiting for the door to open and how to start being the one who opens doors for others. If you are ready to build your legacy in real time, you are in the right place. Let's go. Hello, 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 and welcome back to Women of Color Live, the live version of Women of Color, an intimate conversation, a top 20 women's empowerment podcast. We center and empower women of color. We also have a community for Black women 50 plus, the Dream Lifestyle Collective. Shout out to our production team at the Leon Thomas Group and announcing today's guest. She is a return guest. She is a podcast alum. We met a few years ago. I had a great conversation, so look it up. But today we're talking with Santana Inniss. She is the founder and executive director of the GLOW initiative, GLOWY. She's an Afro-Latina and social impact builder on a mission to end barriers in access to professional coaching. This month, our focus is highlighting women who build legacy in real time. Santana, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's so good to be back. Thank you for having me back on.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for coming back. It's ready to have this conversation, girl. Let's get into it. I'm so excited. So for those that don't know, Santana is in Portugal. And so when we first got on the call, she mentioned, oh, I'm in Europe. And I'm like, oh my goodness. I just don't think of Lisbon, Portugal being in Europe. So that kind of threw me. But she is. And I know it because I was there back in November. and we had espresso together. So
yes, we did.
Yes, we did. And girl, you tried to get me to walk up some very tall steps. That was not happening.
Yeah. Well, anyone that visits me ends up putting in, getting up that step count. So
Yes. So that was a good time. So let's go ahead and get into today's conversation. Yeah. So who are you before the title, before the credential, before the build? And what was the decision that shifted how you saw yourself as someone built to lead?
There's so much juiciness in that question. So I almost want to savor it for a moment.
Go ahead.
I think, back in the day when I used to send out my speaker bio, it started with the following sentence. My story begins with two parents who were doing their best. So when I think back to who was I before the titles, right? There's my work before GLOWY, obviously but there's my life before that work. And I think at my core, what carries with me from like the beginning is being a person, sort of straddling two worlds, going to school in the 1990s and coming home to what felt like 1940s Panama, right? It's being Afro-Latina, it's being a member of two cultures simultaneously. This for me is really a grounding principle for who I think of myself as, but also the way that I move through my work and why I think, started from the bottom. Now we're here as an ethos, but also just the way that I grew up and the people that I grew up with and seeing, there was so much diversity. And so there was never really the option for me of really believing the myth of the American dream, because I think it's a very beautiful myth. But I think that there are many, many people that work incredibly hard day in and day out. And no matter how hard they work, doors will just not open for them. So who was I before the titles? I was a person witnessing this truth in reality, in real time, that we can hold this beautiful myth and we can let it pull us forward and light a fire under our spirit. But we can also hold the truth at the same time that there are millions of people doing grueling work day in and day out and having not really much change in their lives. And so what did I have to unlearn to fully step into? Or maybe before that, you asked about the decision to see myself as someone that was built to lead. I guess the decision was to do me. I think that a lot of my early career, I had a lot of challenges, of course, being the only brown person, the only woman, sometimes in certain rooms. My background was in digital strategy. And so that meant that I was very often the only person in a room. But I was born with a justice lens. That was one of my core values that I came into the world with. And the commentary on fairness and what felt fair and what didn't feel fair, these are conversations that I was having with my mom as a toddler. And so I had to finally say, okay, this is just who I am. And the beautiful gift of being multi-ethnic is that I saw how the world treated my father as a Black Latin immigrant, and I saw how the world treated my mother as a white daughter of the revolution. And so I simply just never chose to move through space as if I was lucky to be there. I chose to move through space as if I inherently deserved to be there. And when I met the friction of people that weren't sure what to do with that energy coming from a woman of color, I had to decide, okay, this is just going to be the path for me, for better or for worse. And so stepping into really sitting with the call to be in the work that I'm in now and to be leading this work and championing this work, I did have to unlearn, what does it mean to be a founder? Because I think that word has become so loaded. When you think of who a founder is and what a founder looks like, it's generally not this, right? I say, I'm the founder and CEO, and like that conjures up some images in your mind. And so how Glowy and our work began, it was as a grassroots volunteer initiative led by me, yes, but with dozens and dozens of volunteers coming up and taking a seat at the table to serve women in need. But that transition from grassroots to, okay, this is a 501c3, this is an organization, this is a formal structure, it's on a mission. I was comfortable playing in the I lead a social impact grass movement, this movement. I was comfortable in that. Stepping into using the title founder, I had to unlearn all of those associations, because those associations felt like they felt like a gate or like bars. The demarcation between who is allowed to lead and who is allowed to start something, grow something, be something, scale something. And I was surprised to learn that I needed to unlearn those associations for myself to really be able to step into what it is that I'm building, to own it and claim it, so that I can be present for the legacy as it's being built and not just in hindsight.
So I do want to pull a few things. So you talked about straddling two worlds. So actually, before I visited Lisbon, I was part of a Facebook group, and they were talking about how Black was not the same in Lisbon as it would be in the US. And so I started to pay attention to that. And then I started to think, well, what is it like being Black globally? So for you, moving from California, moving to to Lisbon, and being a multicultural person who, as you said, straddling two different worlds. What was your take on that? Is black to you there? Are you seen as black? Are they more focused on something else? What's your experience around that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And sometimes I'll put it to people this way. And I think this is a question that anyone anywhere on earth can ask themselves about their country. Is your country primarily racist or primarily classist? Like, what is the predominant ist or ism going on in your country? And I think that to its very foundations, the United States is primarily racist. And how do we know? Yeah, okay. Now we're talking about, you had Occupy Wall Street being the first time, probably since the golden age, the Gilded Age rather, that you had a concentrated movement of people speaking out against the idea of billionaires, et cetera. We're still seeing that today. It's growing, eat the rich, blah, blah, as an ethos. But what's always been true is racism. And I think that in Portugal, in my lived experience, and again, I'm going to couch this with a huge caveat that it's my lived experience. Angolan descent, Mozambican descent, et cetera, who are really presenting as phenotypically Black and with skin tones that you would start to see conversations around colorism, et cetera. They primarily experience it as racist, although you can counterbalance that experience if you are also wealthy. So there's still a lot of classism influence going on in Portugal. I actually had to confront and then grieve the fact that I am not experienced in Portugal as Black. People do not see me as Black. And whenever I say, no, I am a Black person, they'll say, oh, but don't worry, no one can tell.
Okay.
Yeah.
You were worried.
Well, I'm not, right?
Right.
This is just who I am and how I move in these streets. And so I almost feel, because there's so much passing privilege, right? Mm-hmm. These are all really complicated topics, and how I'm experiencing this is maybe not how you experienced. But because I have this passing privilege, I always choose to introduce myself as Black or Afro-Latina. Because white people never claim me, although I'm also 50% white. They just don't claim me. And so here it's almost like I make a concentrated effort, because I don't want to lose my connection to this part of my being and my culture, because here people are choosing not to view me that way. Whereas in the United States, it's kind of ever present.
Yes.
And I'm curious to hear from your perspective how you experienced your time in Portugal, because it was a trip to be walking around thinking for 3 years that there was very little racism, only to then be educated that I'm not experiencing it anymore because people here do not view me as Black.
Right. No, very interesting. And so those who are watching, drop WOC in the comments so we know you're out there. If you're family, drop a heart. If you're a dreamer, drop dreamer. And of course, we want your questions. So we want to engage with you. So drop those questions. So I'm glad you asked. It was interesting for me because I remember being on the top of the bus on one of those tours. And I saw a woman who, to me, I knew she was Black, walking. Lone Black woman. And I said, you know what? The way I was looking at her, recognizing and knowing she was Black, I said to myself that, you know what? I'm sure that's how people are seeing me, because I'm like the lone Black person walking around. And so at that moment, that's how, actually, you know what? I take it back. It wasn't even in Portugal. It was actually in Mexico City. So
I
yeah,
was gonna say because Lisbon, we
I
have a
know,
really large,
wrong
yeah.
place, wrong place. So, so as far as my experience as a Black woman in Portugal, nothing stood out to me. I just moved through just like I would anywhere else, and I did, and I hit different parts of Lisbon as well as I went to Porto. So I didn't experience anything. I didn't feel like anyone treated me any kind of way as a Black person. None of that. And as far as what I was read before coming, how people are like, oh no, they more so identify based on like their country of origin. I didn't even experience that either. It was like, no, they were Black. Even the one woman
Yeah.
she's from Cape Verde. She didn't like announce herself as being, oh, I'm from Cape Verde. That was part of our conversation, but it was like, I'm Black. And so communicating with people, it was about Blackness, and it wasn't, siloed anyway as saying, no, no, you have to talk to us about being from this or that place. It wasn't that at all for me. However, it kind of formed or planted a seed in my mind to think about that, because then a few months later, I was in Toronto at an event for Black folks. And they said to me, oh, so what do you have going on? Like, okay, of course, Black, right? We already know that, but it looked like you got a little Indigenous and some Asian going on. And everyone there did identify based off of where they were from. Bayesian, Kenyan, Ugandan. No one said they were Canadian. And so,
Mm,
yeah, and so that's when I'm like, okay, wait, there's something to this or something to explore. And so now I'm starting to look at and think about,
yeah.
being Black globally.
Yeah. When I was at a tech company and was a leader of the ERG for the African diaspora, and we had to specifically name it that way
Mm.
because there are a lot of folks in the world that do not, they're Black, but they do not use the word Black and they don't identify as Black. They might identify as you said, their country of origin. They might identify
Yes.
as African or a member of the African diaspora, but there are many people in the world that don't use the word Black. And so it was in that context because it was this global tech company where they had employees in 90 countries. And so the people that were in the ERGs were often like, why are you always talking about this racism stuff? Like, what is that?
Yes.
Because in the place that they live, I don't know what it's like to grow up in a majority Black country. That's not what my experience was. But for many people, they may not conceive of themselves using Black as a word. Some will capitalize the B, some don't capitalize the B. And, I think it's just a really interesting conversation, not to divide, but to be curious and to explore.
Yes.
Because I think the more curious we are about our lived experiences as Black people, right, as members of an African diaspora, it's just such a beautiful legacy. And the more that we're curious about the lived experiences of others, I just think that's all to the good.
Absolutely. And you know what? And I remember also being at an event, and someone mentioning they were from one of the islands. And they said they didn't even know they were Black until they came to the US, because the US puts people in boxes. And that
Mm-hmm.
stayed with me. And it's like, right, because from wherever, I don't know if she was from St. Lucia, but it was like, I'm St. Lucian, or,
Yeah.
that type of thing. And that's how people identify. And like right now, there's this whole thing on social media about yo no soy Black, yo soy Dominican. And some people are in an uproar because they're like, I'm not Black, I'm Dominican. And they are Black Dominicans. However,
Well,
and that's a whole deep thing. The thing is, I'm like, I'm not mad at them saying
yeah.
I'm Dominican, because that's right. And they kind of do know the Afro Dominican part, the Afro, all of that. They do know that, but there's, they love that they are Dominican. So I don't really have a problem with that. But when we put people in boxes, we know what box they go in.
We know, and I think that whenever we're making an effort to put someone in a box, it is an effort to actually categorize ourselves vis-a-vis their box, right? Because shit rolls downhill. Am I higher uphill from you or am I lower downhill from you? And
Right.
so that's a really interesting in the United States being in this body, because sometimes I, wear my hair straight with a blowout. And that throws people for a loop with the what are you and the where are you from and where are your parents from? But like,
Right.
no, really, what about your grandparents? People get really uncomfortable when they can't clock you and put
Exactly.
you in the box to tell them, are they above you, to the side of you, or are they below you? And I don't think that's a uniquely American experience, but it is something that I experience really often because people just can't really put their finger on what my ethnic background is unless I name it and claim it.
Right.
And, and the one thing that I would just say about the no soy negro, soy dominicano thing, bless, love that journey. But what I can say from my experience having an Afro-Latin family, from Panama, people they can be racist.
Mm-hmm.
And it is really a really sensitive and complicated reality that immigrants, Afro-Latino immigrants that come to the United States experience, because they've also been indoctrinated by osmosis through our media, which the US is the primary exporter is media, right? Our movies, music, culture is consumed around the world. And that means that when other people view our media and there are racist or sexist tropes and stereotypes being disseminated around the world, that also shapes the way that the imagination of who lives in the United States is formed for people around the world sometimes. And in my family's case, that formed in a very like, hey, we need to distance ourselves from this thing because those Black people are bad and we're good Black people.
Right. Right. And you know what? And as we continue talking, I'm reminded, or I'm remembering myself that no, actually, I probably do have a problem with it because it goes deeper than that, right? They're trying to keep them, it's the proximity to the colonizer. And that's what they're saying, like, oh no, I'm not Black. I'm this other thing here. So I guess it would be what's the intent behind you saying that?
Yeah.
The intent is because, you want the proximization to whiteness, then yeah, I do have a problem with that. And that's that, right? Because there's a whole deep thing with Dominicans and Asians, you know what I'm saying, which is so sad. And I at this point, I would never go to Dominica, to the DR for those reasons. But moving away from this has been rich. Yeah, this has been rich talking about this, right? Because like I said, I'm now starting to like think about things globally, like, okay, how am I showing up? Or not even so much how am I showing up, but how do people who I look at, you're Black, in various countries, how do they identify? And that's something that I'm starting to explore.
And I think it's a beautiful thing to explore. And that's something that really, at least in my experience, it develops through traveling and experiencing other cultures. When you stay in one place forever, and I recognize that there's privilege in saying travel, and there's, I recognize that. But if you have the ability to travel, it is so important to make the decision to, because when you don't realize the water and you're a fish, right? Mm-hmm. You just think that's life, and the ideas and the thoughts and the values and the mores. I really could not imagine before I started traveling and living abroad that there were people that viewed issues any differently than and it's crazy to say. I'm thinking of me in my, really early 20s. I was like absolutely clueless. And now living and experiencing and traveling, I've been to 49 countries. It's just like you recognize that the things that you think are simply the things that you think, and that there are 8.3 billion beings on this earth that are also thinking things too. And the way that societies form their collective imagination is different in every place that you travel. And when you start operating at that level of curiosity, I think that for me, it's like expanding my capacity for compassion and empathy and curiosity from, like a square, a little like a postage stamp to, the Great Plains. Like, it's just a massive mindset shift when you recognize that people have other thoughts, values, feelings, and you can't assume that they see you the way that you see you. It's incredibly powerful if you couch it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and even if, you talked about travel as a privilege, which it is, we recognize that. So there's also reading, there's, watching YouTube videos, listening to podcasts. There's different ways to immerse yourself in other cultures. But bottom, I think the message that I want to take away from this part is get out of your box, out of your square, and learn about other people. Learn and appreciate other people. And it just enhances and enriches your life.
100%.
Yeah. So we've talked about, we're talking about building, we're talking about leading, we're talking about legacy. And so you share with us your background. That's how we got into that conversation. And you also talked about what you're building now through Glowy, being the activist background, what you were learning when you were 3 and 4 years old and how it has shaped who you are today. So with your experiences, right, moving from the US, moving to Europe, and all the things that we've talked about, how has any of it changed how you define legacy today?
While
she's thinking, don't forget to drop those questions.
Yeah, drop some questions. Get in the chat, peeps. I think that before I moved abroad and started traveling, I would think of legacy as something for other people, right? Like, the word legacy kind of brought up ideas in me about like wealthy white philanthropic families, like, I don't know, the Rothschilds, and they put their name on a building and it costs millions of dollars. I went to college, I walked in a lot of rooms that had dead white people names on them. I'll be honest, right? Like, it's a lot of dead white guys with names on college campuses. And that was how I always thought of legacy. I thought of legacy as something that you only have the luxury of considering when you have a massive amount of wealth that you plan to pay forward or, leave to another generation. That's how I thought about the word. Similar as the way that I had conceived of the word founder. For me, it was sort of like, these are words for other people.
Right.
These aren't words for, people like me or people with my background. And so I think my conception of legacy really started to change when I started to build the Glow Initiative. For me, I've done a lot of really cool things in my life and my career, but this is probably the first time where I feel like I am building something that I might conceive of as my life's work. That's how I feel about this. And that's a really, interesting sort of a headspace to enter. And not that I have aspirations for Glowy to scale to the moon and scale for scale's sake. But we know through lots of data and analysis that when you invest in women, that investment is not hoarded, right? That wealth is divvied out to all of the people around her, her children, her broader family, her community, and out through the societal level. And so the fact that I am alive And every time I am able to run a new cohort through and match more women with access to a type of support that can unlock something either in her present or for future generations, I am aware that it is a legacy that I build. It is living, and that this legacy that I build that lives is also contributing to just a very small, it could be a punctuation mark, but it's a punctuation mark in the legacies of many, 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 many other people, women, and the impacts that they have beyond themselves. And so that sort of shifted a bit my perspective. And that it wasn't necessarily because of living abroad. I think it was more getting older and maybe starting to think about it in this way. I'm not that old, but I do use a retinol, so maybe y'all can't tell like what I'm working with over here.
Well, you got the sun glow coming through the window.
So yeah, I mean, and I think that is a mindset shift that folks can take like today, no matter how old you are. You can be 15 or you can be 50 or you can be 95. It's not necessarily about, oh my God, my life is flashing before my eyes. What do I want people to think about me when I'm gone? People are thinking about you right now, boo. Like they're thinking about you today. What do you want them to be thinking about you today? And are you living that thing? I wake up every day and my eyes blink open and I'm like, ooh, what can I do for Glowy today? Like, what's going to happen? And, that is, it just hits really different when the impact of your work is so proximate and so connected, but also, there's a lot of it that's out of my hands, because once that coaching match happens and the cycle runs and the program ends, that I'm walking alongside a very tiny little piece of someone's journey through this work, but it's a part of their journey that is usually pretty impactful. And so, I think that if I had been thinking more intentionally about what sort of mark I wanted to have on the world as a younger person, who knows what I would have done differently, but I am still a young person. I'm going to claim it. You heard it here first, folks.
Absolutely.
She's still young. I am still a young person, and I am alive, and I like to feel that my work, I think that when we're intentionally thinking about how we want our work to make people feel, how we want to live in our values, when we're thinking that way, we are thinking about legacy. Legacy isn't something that you leave behind exclusively. It's also something that you live. And if you are alive, you are building the bricks of that story today, not when you die. I don't know.
You said
that land.
What is it to you? And really what I took from it, and you even said a part of this, is impact. Legacy is impact, right? Whether it's a building, because that's impactful, whether it's what you're doing by investing in women who are able to invest in others, and that just rolls over, right? Because absolutely, when you invest in women, we invest in everybody. Everybody is impacted positively. We know that, and we've talked, outside of this conversation, it is a conversation about the impact that we have, Black women especially, that what we have, right? And why there's such targeted strategic attacks against us, right? That's why. Now you mentioned something, and here we go again, like thinking. So I recently read that what is her name? Shonda Rhimes. So Shonda Rhimes, she actually donated money to Dartmouth. I believe that's where she went, her alma mater, money for a building. So there's going to be a building named after a Black woman, which I absolutely love, right? You just talked about the dead white men, their names on building, right? So now we have a sister who has her name on the building. Now, my first thought whenever I see things like this is, oh, would have been nice if that was an HBCU, right? Or I would have loved it being an HBCU. However, there's power in it being a PWI, a predominantly white institution. I think Dartmouth is an Ivy League or whatever. What are your thoughts around that?
I mean, I think that's really interesting. And, you know, I sort of, I speak very sarcastically about dead white dudes' names on buildings. When someone gives a lot of money and has a building, it's not like I mean, sometimes it is. Sometimes they are literally paying to erect that building. I've seen that happen. But sometimes they're just taking one name off a building and putting it in. The building is fine structurally. It's doing okay. That money is used for other things. So look, I mean, I'm Black. I went to an Ivy League school. We out here, we're doing it. So, I mean, the impact, I think, for, you know, if I had felt like that space was like a little bit more inclusive, I can imagine feeling like, okay, I see you. We are out here, you know? So I don't really have a comment on Shonda Rhimes making that choice. I mean, if that's her alma, I think we all feel some kind of special way about, well, maybe not everybody, but I feel some kind of way. And, you know, I still feel like, you know, my alma makes me angry sometimes, and they make me like, "Rawr, what are you doing?" You know, so I still feel connected to it. I feel like I'm a member of that community. I am a vested stakeholder in that. And when they're fucking up, I have a comment, you know, I get an email, I'm like, reply, "Hello, Dean of Students. Let me tell you what I think about what you just said," you know, because I think that, taking up space, you know, we have to move beyond. And I don't mean broadly, I mean me. This is like work in my life of moving beyond like, okay, they have allowed me to enter this space. Screw that. I belong everywhere I choose to be. And so if I, you know, choose to go to this school, I belong there. And if you want to transact in some shared Delulu, which tells you that because you have a little less melanin than me, that I don't, that's your Delulu. Do that over there. So, you know, I think that for Shonda Rhimes to want to have her name on a building, you know, I can't foresee me ever wanting to have my name on a building. It feels a little odd to me. But I know that when people are at a certain level of wealth, that is something they concern themselves with. And for some people, this is how they conceive of legacy. And if that's how she conceives of legacy, then go off, sis. Live your best life. Put your name on a building. I don't know what they did with that money, if that endowed some kind of scholarship for, you know, writers or creatives or Black I don't know what it did. I don't know anything on it, but, you know, I don't think that, I guess what I want to say is I don't want to be overcritical of, like, you know, I think we can kill our darlings a lot. Sometimes in ways that we shouldn't. And then in some ways that we should, we don't, in the Black, you know, community largely in the United States. And we don't have to get into that latter category because this is a positive podcast. But I think that if we're policing how, you know, the ones that get to the really tippy top of the American experience, and I don't want to shade Shonda. Could it have been really well used in an HBCU? I'm sure it could have been really well used in an HBCU. But, you know,
Right,
that's not where she went. So
right.
I mean,
And so
I'm happy
no,
for
and
her.
here's the deal. It's less about her and what I and actually what I'm trying to get at, the significance of her name, a Black woman's name, being on the
Yeah.
building in a PWI. That's really the question about that. Less about her,
I
because I
think it's
mean, yes,
incredible.
yeah, that part.
I think it's incredible because I don't think there were any names of Black peoples on buildings when I was in undergrad, and it was so outside the realm of imagination that I can't even speak with great authority on it because I literally assumed that they were all white, white
Right.
names, usually men. And at the tail end of my collegiate experience, there was a building named, and it had a man's name and his wife's name. So it was like the blah blah A and blah blah B, blah blah building.
Yeah.
So it's very rare that there's women's names on buildings. It's very very rare that there's a Black person's name on a building. And so, can you just imagine a 18, 17, 18-year-old little Black girl stepping foot on Dartmouth campus for the first time, not seeing a whole bunch of people that look like her, and then looking up and seeing the Shonda Rhimes auditorium, blah, 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 whatever the building is?
Yes.
That is incredible.
Yes. That
And
right.
that type of representation, um, God, when it happens, it's happened a few times in my life because, of course, we have poor representation for um, Black people broadly. I think in the United States in media, we could say, I think specifically for women. And then when we start looking at even intersections of that, it was until very, very recently that I started to see people having conversations about the experience of being biracial. There's a fly, sorry, of being biracial. And or being the child of an immigrant and not speaking Spanish fluently. Like,
Mhm.
these are conversations that have just started to pop off in the media. And when I see these conversations, or I see biracial women that look like me represented in the media, or Afro Latinas, or these types of things, there's like this, it's probably where white men get all their audacity, because there's just something, it just like enters my bloodstream that's like,
Yeah.
yes, go off.
Right. So
So
that's what that
I
build. That's what her name being on that building does, right? That's what it
think
will do
so.
for young girls and even
Yeah.
boys who are entering Dartmouth and seeing that. So, and that is absolutely huge. So that part I love and thankful that that she's done that. So Santana, the Glow Initiative serves women who can't access professional coaching on their own. What do you wish more women understood about why that gap exists and what it costs us as a community when it does? And hold that thought. We'll be back
Okay.
after this break. Hi, I'm Deneen L. Garrett, a cultural alchemist who shapes culture through storytelling, through writing, through speaking, through my top 20 women's empowerment podcasts. And if you're seeing this, you're watching me on Women of Color Live, the live version, the weekly live version of that podcast. I am coming to you to ask you to vote for me. I am in the running to become Entrepreneur of Impact, and it's going to take all of us to get me there. So check this out and stay tuned. All right. Well, welcome back to Women of Color Live. We are talking about building with purpose and opening doors, locked doors with Santana Inniss. And Santana, let's get back to that question that I asked before break.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, I think the thing that I wish more women knew was that the gap exists. Period. Right? The gap exists, and we saw this in the McKenzie Lean-In study, which I have some beef with. But they did show that even for, I think they pulled, I think the sample size was 8 or 10,000 folks. men and women working in what I would consider corporate America, which already implies privilege, right? At every level of a woman's career, they do not have equitable access to coaching, sponsoring, or mentorship. So like the gap exists. If you want to dive deeper into how and why that gap exists, I think there are some things coming from the coaching industry itself. The majority of coaches do not earn enough money to live. The majority of coaches are women, right? So this sort of creates a market that's oversaturated. The prices have to go sky high for someone to be able to afford to live. And so you end up with the average cost of a coaching hour in North America being $272 an hour, according to the ICF. So when you start looking at the fact that even in corporate America, where they know the value of coaching and they provide that readily to their executive suite, C-suite, and director level and above, they provide it more often to men in those categories than they provide it to women in the same categories. And then you think about the fact that $272 an hour. If you don't work in corporate America, if you work a trade or you're a stay-at-home mom or you got your GED or, right? Just the financial barrier alone forms a gap in access. We have a wage gap for every intersection of women in the United States, getting worse. Latinas, for example, earn 60 something cents to a white man's dollar. So you have, on the one hand, you have a cost barrier, a financial barrier that's very real. You also have a structural barrier where you see inequity in access in spaces where coaching services are being provided to staff. Why does this matter? Why does this matter? Coaching has been studied. It is effective. We know the efficacy of coaching. And when I say coaching, I'm talking about educated, ethics-based, accredited or certified professional coaching. We know that this has an efficacy. We know that it has the potential to expand your career, improve your career trajectory, your leadership, your relational capacity. It has the possibility to improve your personal development as well. And then you see coaching go into some niche specialties. So Glowy has financial coaches, Glowy has grief coaches. So we know that coaching is incredibly effective. We know that women lack access to this. This is a recipe for disaster, is it not? When we know that there is a credible modality out there that has been shown to be effective at improving your career, your financial, your personal trajectory, and then women don't have access to it. That's a problem. And it's a problem that we're not really talking about when we think about who has ready access to this proven modality. So there's a gap that exists by gender. Then there's also a gap that can exist based on other intersections that women may have. So what I want people to take away is that we're not talking about coaching as like a woo-woo, touchy-feely, spa day type of a thing. Although if you like that and that's how you work on yourself, go off, queen. I love it for you. No shade. However, we're talking about the difference between a woman being able to successfully negotiate her salary or this has the capacity to change, right? We have a lot of breadwinner moms. And if you're in a community of color, the percentage of breadwinner moms goes up. Right? So we have women out here that are the primary breadwinners for their families. The difference between negotiating for 20, 40, 60, 100,000 more in their career trajectory, that compounds significantly over time, where a woman may be leaving more than $1 million on the table in her lifetime without support for negotiating salary or getting to the next level in her career. But Glowy also works with intersections of women that are pretty much structurally barred from lots of areas of support. So we've worked with organizations that provide support services to women who have experienced domestic violence, women who have been the victims of sex trafficking. We've worked with women who have been unhoused, the formerly incarcerated. And so if we can get access to something that the C-suite loves, right? They love coaching. They love a coach. We know they love a coach because they're paying sometimes more than $1,000 an hour to have a single coaching session. So we know that this modality is effective. When we can get this modality into the hands of the people, the women who need it most, as you said earlier, when we invest in women, that pays dividends outwards. That woman glows outward. She radiates outward as she improves her own life, her own trajectory. That goes for her kids. That goes for any community involvement that she's active in. It goes to the society level as well. So that's what I really want people to take away from this time, is that a coaching access gap exists. It's structural as well as financial. And that when we remove that barrier, the floodgates open in terms of capacity for women to succeed, to achieve, to go farther, to climb higher.
So kudos to you for, creating this, building this to close that gap. But what do you want to tell the woman who's watching? What do you want her to walk away with and build, or stop waiting to start, right? So the women that you are servicing, what message do you have for them?
Well, the message that I would have for any woman is, if I can build this, you can build something too. I just got really pissed off one day and decided to start because I didn't get access to a coach until I was in my, I was already up there. I'd already been VP. I had already reported to a CEO, and then I got access to a coach. So for me, it was too late to salvage that career. I was burnt out. I was over the edge, and I needed to completely change. And that's all the coach could support me in understanding, is like, hey, Queen, you're burnt out and you need to make moves here. So, if I can go through all of that and recognize, okay, even me way up here was never offered access to a professional coach in a professional setting, like, there's a problem here. And so I saw a problem. It made me angry. And I just started one day on this literal beige couch. I sometimes write about this beige couch. It's the first time I've ever had a beige couch. Usually I've gone with millennial gray. Now it's a beige couch. And from this beige couch, I started a movement that has impacted over 500 women. There have been nearly 200 coaches who have donated their time to this work. We have provided services in kind to 16 nonprofits and foundations, and we have accidentally gone global. So we've coached women on 5 continents across 17 time zones. So small beginnings, right? Small beginnings are the way everything starts. So if you're thinking about starting something, if it pisses you off, and you've been thinking about it, you should probably just start that thing. And then what do I want women to know that are out there who want coaching, have heard of coaching, they think it might help them, and they don't know where to start or where to go? Take up space, sis. You deserve this access. This access should be equitable. And there are organizations like Glowy that are out here trying to get this access to you. There's no direct Glowy competitor. We're out here on our own in this space. But we primarily bring coaching to women through partnerships with nonprofits that are already in the community. They've already built trust. They're already bringing really great services to women, and we go in and we expand that access. So raise your hand when these opportunities come by. There are so many women who, in their application to receive coaching through Glowy, will say something to the effect of, okay, but if there's another woman that needs it more than me, I guess I don't actually need to take this spot. No, Queen, name it and claim it. take up space. If it's
Right.
being offered to you, if there's a service that's out there, take it. Why not? We're doing this work, to bring this access to women. You just got to do your part and show up and do that work. So I guess it's twofold. If I can do it, you can do it. Just start. And then on the flip side of, when you're presented with an opportunity to get some support, take the opportunity to get the support. Because I can tell you there are, if we look at men, I don't think they're out here worrying about whether or not their brothers in arms are going to get that same access. This is something that I think often can show up in a way that it prevents women from reaching out and claiming the support once it's been offered. So those are two kind of thoughts that come to mind as I hear that question.
Yeah. And then a third one just to throw out there,
Yes.
which is kind of implied, and we've seen it scrolling across. Also, you can donate, right, to help what you're doing. So that's a third option. So you don't wait for permission, you become it. And when you become it, everything rises to meet you. That's the Dream Lifestyle Standard. And if you're ready to live it, join us inside the Dream Lifestyle Collective, a community for Black women 50 and up. And we're about strategy, sisterhood, and structure. So before we wrap, what would you like to leave those who are watching or listening with?
Yeah, well, Glowy is an opportunity for folks to get involved. Right now, I think there's a lot going on in the world, and I know a lot of people that I speak to feel pretty helpless, and they don't know how they can individually have an impact. Look, I'll be honest with you, it sounds a little flip when I say if I can do it, you can do it. Starting a nonprofit isn't easy. That might not be your journey, but there are so many nonprofits out there and other grassroots organizations that are rising to meet this very moment. Glowy was started in 2014 because of the moment that we're in. And so if you can look into your pocketbook, if you have $5, $10, $100, slide it to an organization that's doing good work. I would love it to come to Glowy because it means we can match even more women and even harder to reach communities with access to professional coaching. But get out there, spread those dollars around, because it's these types of organizations like Glowy that are on the ground and doing the work in these times.
Thank you so much for that. So those who are watching or listening, share this with a woman who needs to be reminded that legacy is what you're building right now. Thank you to the Leon Thomas Group for producing us. And we'll be back next Thursday, actually 2 Thursdays from now, at 1 p.m. Eastern with Kaya James. So until next time, thank you, Santana Inniss. I appreciated our conversation and catching up.